Welcome to Accept Your Gifts, the 22-minute podcast for inspiring your most creative life. My name is Tracy Crow. I'm an author, writing coach, and Marine Corps veteran. I'm looking forward to co-creating today's show with you. So if you're ready, are you ready? I'm ready. So if you're ready to live a more creative, more magical life, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm fighting a little bit of a sinus head cold thing from my flight to teach a writing workshop this past weekend. So if I sound a little different today, you'll know why. But I am so excited to introduce you to my special guest, who is Susan Gray. Now, I first met this remarkable woman a couple of years ago when she uprooted her entire life, moved from Texas, and moved to North Carolina to live with her sister, CJ, who has been my oldest, dearest friend for about, 37, 38 years now since the two of us met in the Marine Corps. But Susan has lived and experienced a great deal of challenge and trauma, and has found that it's sewing and quilting that makes sense to her. These are the things creatively that make sense when her entire universe feels alternate, upside down, without any sense at all. And, let's just listen in and let Susan tell us the story. Susan, I wanted to introduce you to our listeners because you're one of the most diverse, creative people I know. But you're also one of the most resilient people I've ever met. I say this because I know a little about the trauma you've experienced. Would you mind sharing a little of that story and then share how you've used creativity to help you through those challenging times?
I would definitely love to share. Almost 4 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been that long, I got a call at work. And it was a woman from Child Protective Services telling me they had interviewed my son because there was a concern his father was molesting him. And it happened to be April 2nd. And I worked with a bunch of practical jokers. And I honestly said to this woman, this is the worst belated April Fool's joke ever. And she told me, no, ma'am, this is no joke. And that is how I found out that my husband of 27 years had molested a teenage boy and was about to be arrested. Needless to say, an event like that kind of makes your world crash and burn. 27 years, 4 kids, a big house, a good life, and all of a sudden the rug is yanked out from underneath you and you have to figure out what you're going to do. But the interesting part of the story is, as much as it shocked me, it was not the first time that I was aware he had molested a boy. The first time I found out, 9 years after he molested my nephew. By then I had 4 kids under the age of 10 and hadn't worked in 4 years. I wanted to believe this man I married made a stupid mistake, which is what he said. So for the sake of my children, I stayed. So when this happened, April 2nd, 2015, I looked at him and said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I'm done. And, it was hard. We still had moments where we cried together because a part of me still loved him. But then I started figuring out that there was so much about this man I didn't know. And that was devastating. I ended up going on a very long, crazy journey. He manipulated my older children to where they thought I was being mean and making life more difficult for him, when I knew in my heart, he's done this twice. How many other victims are there out there, I can't let another child get hurt by him.
Right.
But he played the innocent victim so well, our older children considered me to be the bad guy. And so I had a lot of emotional ups and downs through this journey. And sewing has always been a creative outlet for me. Sewing and crafting and creating, because when you are in that world and you're trying to make something, you get so focused on it, and it helps you not focus on the negative. And for me, it's always making something positive. The majority of things that I have made in this journey have all been for other people, because that gives me joy, is being able to make something for someone that makes them happy. And I think you'll remember you came to the house and were complaining of having a little power surge. And my immediate thought will create a cup that said, "I'm still a hot babe, but now it comes in flashes."
I love that. My favorite cup.
Yeah, because, to me, it was like, I get so much joy out of giving something to you to make you smile and happy and go, "Oh my gosh, that's wonderful." It helped me get outside of myself. And far too often when you're going through something that traumatic, you get stuck in that, not really a pity party, but you just get stuck in that hurt and that pain, because I was being punished by my children for something that their father did that they didn't want he did. So they looked at my reaction and punished me. So there was so much that didn't make sense to me. Sewing makes sense. For a lot of people, my sister CJ, she is just blown away, cannot figure out how I come up with the things that I come up with, but it makes sense to me. And, sometimes you have to look at those little things that make sense when nothing else does.
Boy, you need to stencil that somewhere. Something great. Knowing you probably already have. That's profound. Now, the story of your husband did not end well, right?
No, it did not. His trial got delayed 3 times. After the second time it got delayed, my family was very concerned for my safety. So I actually moved from Texas to North Carolina and didn't even tell my children, because I did not want my ex to have any clue where I was. And his trial got delayed again after I got here. And then in the meantime, I got a job. So I thought, well, I'm just going to stay. This isn't temporary. I'm going to stay, which I'm glad I did. I love it here. But then on May 1st of 2017, they were at the courthouse getting ready for jury selection. He went up to the prosecutor table and saw a list of 23 names. Now, he told my children I gave them all sorts of names. Well, I technically only gave him 4 names that were on that list. Well, that means there were 19 people on that list that didn't come from me.
Right.
But one of the names on the list was our son, and our youngest son, because he had gotten arrested for tampering with a witness a month after this all started. And then he
Oh,
did
wait,
later get,
wait. Let's clarify. It wasn't your son who was arrested for tampering with a witness. It was your ex-husband, right?
correct. What he did is he used our son's cell phone to text the victim to see what the victim was going to say on the witness. So his name and said, why is he testifying? And the prosecutor said, he is testifying to the witness tampering and he will be telling the truth. And I was not in Dallas at the time, but I got a call from the prosecutor saying, well, Susan, he's disappeared. They couldn't find him. He wouldn't answer his phone. He wouldn't answer texts. And so they thought he had fled. And he had told me in previous months that he'd cashed in his 401k and had this money. And, you know, if he wanted to flee, he had the money. But then she called me about 20 minutes later and said they found him. He actually left the courthouse and committed suicide in the parking lot of the courthouse.
Susan, what did that feel?
No, you hate to say a sense of relief, but there was some relief in there because, number one, he could no longer harm any other kids. But number two, he could no longer use my children against me. He could no longer, you know, because if he went to prison, he would continue to manipulate my children's minds from prison. He would have written them letters and told them all sorts of stories, and it would have made my life miserable. So there was that little bit of relief, but then there was that utter, you know, heartbreaking anguish over the fact that he just destroyed my children.
Right. Oh my goodness.
They had spent the weekend with him. They'd gone out to dinner. They'd gone places to play games. He had spent time with the kids, left for the courthouse in his suit and tie, said goodbye. And 2 hours later, they get a call that he'd killed himself. They were still in that mindset of, mom is the reason he did this because she made it more difficult for him. So it was devastating for my children and devastating for me because my children didn't want much to do with me because they were dealing with, you know, their dad's estate and setting up a memorial and all that. And so as a mother, to sit by and know my children are hurting and I'm probably the last person on earth they want to comfort them.
Susan, this is the first time you and I have ever spoken of this. And even though I've known on the periphery end of what you've been through your sister, my dear friend, but it's the first time you and I have spoken about this. And even knowing what I already know before you told this, it's still heartbreaking. I can feel that pain. The pain, I mean, you feel you have to be there for your children, and yet to them, you're the enemy.
Exactly. And, you know, that was the hardest part for me. I was staying with my younger son, who was 18 and still in high school. And he lived just diagonal in an apartment complex from my ex. So I'm sitting in my son's apartment knowing that my 4 children are over in my ex's apartment crying and I'm not welcome. That's a very difficult place to be.
It is. Oh, mercy. So none of that, I understand what you mean, especially now hearing this firsthand from you, that everything in your reality had become alternate. It was upside down. It made no sense. So when you say that sewing to you, this creating from nothing, sewing makes sense. Okay, but you're in the middle of quilting something very special. Why quilting in particular?
Well, I don't do a lot of clothes sewing. And back in Dallas, I had a sewing business where I did custom home decor. So I made custom drapes and bedding, and I made gorgeous things over the years, and I have just always loved being creative. But I don't really need any bedding right now. And so I happened to see some fabric I liked and saw that there was a pattern that went with it. And I decided, I'm going to make a quilt. And I'm making this for me because I don't normally, like I said, make things for me. And by the way, when I had my sewing business in Dallas, years and years ago, when I went to pick out a name, I named my business So Insane. And it's actually spelled SEW''N'', because to me, I was sewing myself sane.
Oh.
So even all those years ago, sewing was such an outlet of, this is keeping my life in order doing this. So I started this quilt, and it turned out to be a lot more involved than when I read the instructions, I'm like, oh yeah, I've done that. I can do this. Well, it turned out to be a lot more involved, but in such an amazing way. It provided a lot more healing than I expected it to, because it's hard to explain the pattern. There are 37 different fabrics in this quilt, and I sew 7 strips of fabric together in a certain pattern, and then I cut them apart crossways so that each strip I end up with has one of each of the different fabrics. And then I do a little unsewing magic, seam ripping, and stagger the pieces to make this pattern. And one day it dawned on me, I went through my life sewing these strips of my life together, and then all of a sudden something came along, and as I put it, the hell, things that were together weren't together anymore. So I started putting my life back together, and as I did, I wasn't putting it back together the way it was before. But what I'm coming up with is so much more amazing and so much more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. I talk about how some of the fabrics I thought were ugly. Well, you could equate that to the ugly things that happen in your life. And, sometimes I was sewing 7 beautiful pieces of fabric side by side. And that's when life is going great. And then sometimes I was sewing just a couple of good pieces with some of the ugly pieces. And that's the way life is. It's not always going to be a beautiful piece, an ugly piece, a beautiful piece. Sometimes it's going to be beautiful for a long time. And then sometimes it's going to have a whole lot of ugly in it.
Right.
But when you put your life back together after everything has been torn apart, you're taking that ugly and putting it in a smaller piece. And all of a sudden, it's not as ugly. And it gives you perspective. And you realize, you know what? I had to go on this journey to be who I am. And so this quilt, with the 37 different fabrics, by the time the quilt is done, there are going to be 1,764 2-inch squares of fabric in that quilt.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a major undertaking, but it so perfectly describes my life. And normally when you do a quilt, you do just, plain fabric on the back. Well, one day I decided, no, I can't do just plain fabric on the back. And I found a pattern for a phoenix.
Oh,
So I am going to put a phoenix on the back of my quilt with a little pile of ashes, because that's what I am. I'm the phoenix rising from the ashes of a terrible experience, but look at how beautiful I've made it.
okay. Now you're going to make me cry. Ah. Oh my gosh. Woo, tissues. We need tissues, everyone. I'm going to have to make a disclaimer on this one. Tissues. Ah, Susan, that is beautiful. Oh my gosh. So how much longer do you think it will take you to finish this masterpiece of your life?
Well, I have half of the front done, and then I was actually looking at fabric on the internet today. I'm trying to find the perfect fabric to make the phoenix. My goal is to have it done by the end of the year, which I'm sure I can once I find the fabric I want, because there is a in Raleigh next March, and I want to enter the quilt. And with my entry, I'm going to write my story of healing. And having been talking to me now, that I have, I feel like my story needs to be a book of some sort.
Right.
And I toyed with a couple of titles, but I think I'm going to go back to My Life is So Insane, Putting Myself Back Together One Stitch at a Time.
Oh, that's a winner. That's a winner. Love it.
And, of course, the quilt is going to be, the quilt is going to be the story of healing.
Oh, when you hear the phrase, accept your gifts, what does that mean to you?
I think it's a matter of appreciate yourself. Your gift, may not be the same as somebody else. And you may not think it's much of a gift. But you never know what you can do with what you have until you're forced to try. And for me, I have always felt very gifted and very blessed. And, so to be able to take what I love and turn it into something that might be just the thing that somebody else needs to hear. If someone sees that quilt and hears a little bit of the story or reads a little bit of the story with the quilt, and they stop and go, oh my gosh, that's my life too. I'm putting myself back together one piece at a time.
Right.
You break a lamp. You can use all the glue in the world. You're probably not going to make that lamp exactly like it used to be. So why not do something different with it and make it something totally unique and wonderful? Instead of sitting there looking at that broken lamp.
Oh, love that. Love that. All right, I'm going to throw you, well, first of all, let me ask this. How is the relationship today between you and the children?
Well, I've been very blessed that my youngest has stuck by me through the whole thing. So he and I are incredibly close. My younger daughter actually came back to me first after Valentine's Day last year, when she said, "Mom, it's exhausting holding a grudge." So we have healed tremendously. My older daughter did not speak to me until a year after her dad committed suicide. And now things are flowing smoothly. And, my older daughter actually sews as well. And so she creates a lot of things. And so I think that sewing has kind of been part of the healing process, because when she wants to know how to do something, she has mom to call, mom to Skype. I mean, I've talked her through a lot of things over Skype. And so that's been, wonderful to have her back. My oldest son is actually still not speaking to me. I think that there are reasons behind that go to, I'm afraid he might have been a victim. And I honestly feel like talking to mom means admitting. And I don't think he's ready to. And so, as difficult as it is, I don't even reach out to him anymore, because every time I do, it makes him mad. So that's hard. He's my child that made me a mom, and I don't have him in my life at all.
Hopefully time will help.
That is what I'm hoping as well. I think about him often. I say, a little prayer just for healing for him. And I live my life.
What an example. Oh my gosh, what an example of resiliency. You're just so inspirational. All right, I'm going to ask you this. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's imagine you're sitting down to write a letter. And the letter begins like this. Dearest Susan, what I want you to know today about your life is what?
You are stronger than you ever imagined.
Oh, you got me, girlfriend.
Well, when I found out about my nephew, I was not strong. I did not see how I could be a single mom with 4 kids when the youngest was 6 months old, And when this happened, I was like, okay, you got to put your big girl panties on and deal with this and figure out your life. And in kind of a funny way, what made me really realize it was I went on a date, actually. And while we're talking, this guy and I had talked on the phone, and so he knew part of my story. And on this date, he is saying all these things that, that were like, I can help you with this and that sort of thing. And I realized, wait a minute, he's trying to be my knight in shining armor and come rescue me. I'm going to be my own damn knight in shining armor.
I love it.
It's like, and that's when it kind of hit me. That's what I have to do. I have to be my own rescuer.
Right.
Be my own hero.
Right. The hero of your own life story.
Yes, most definitely. And so, I don't have the life I used to have. I don't have the 4,500 square foot house and, all the things that we used to do. But I have the most amazing life now. I still live with my sister, but life is so good. You know, it's simple. It's, you know, it's about living now. Near the end of my marriage, I was just plodding along day by day. There was no life to my life.
Well, Susan, I cannot thank you enough for being and doing Susan so beautifully. You have mastered her, girlfriend. You have mastered her, and you are such an inspiration. Thank you for accepting your gifts and then for sharing your gifts with all of us. Thank you for being with us today on Accept Your Gifts.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's co-creative listening experience. Please remember to leave a comment about the single greatest takeaway for you today. You know, that one thing you will remember from this day forward. Was it something funny or provocative? Was it just what you needed to hear? Please share so we can all benefit. And remember to return Tuesdays and Thursdays to Accept Your Gifts, the 22-minute podcast for inspiring your most creative life.